Real-life Britain's homeless crisis. Thousands homeless, living in cars nobody notices somewhere in a Tesco car park on the edge of Manchester. Right now, a woman is folding a blanket into the boot of her Ford Fiesta. She checks her phone. 6:20. Enough time to get to the toilets at the petrol station down the road, splash her face, change into her uniform, and clock in for her shift at 7:30. She has worked at the same supermarket for 6 years. She has never once missed a shift. Nobody on that shop floor knows she has spent the last 4 months sleeping in that car. She is not unemployed. She is not an addict. She has no criminal record, no dramatic story that explains how she ended up here. She works 38 hours a week, pays her taxes, and still cannot afford a single room within an hour of her job. She contributes to her workplace pension when she can manage it. She has never claimed a benefit in her life she was not entitled to. Before you assume this is a story about someone who fell through the cracks, stay with this for a second. Because who this is actually happening to across Britain in 2026 is going to surprise you. Most people hear the word homelessness and picture something specific. A sleeping bag in a shop doorway. A cardboard sign near a cash machine. Someone visibly, obviously disconnected from ordinary life. That image is real, and it is getting worse. The official rough sleeping count in England has nearly tripled since records began. But that is only the part of this crisis that is easy to see. What this video is about is something quieter, and in a lot of ways much harder to notice at all. It is happening inside ordinary cars, in ordinary car parks, right next to the supermarket you shop in, the office block you work in, the school you drop your kids off at. And the people living through it are doing everything in their power to make sure you never notice. Here's what it actually looks like from the inside. Picture a 39-year-old warehouse supervisor. 12 years with the same logistics company. Bills paid on time, every time. He is not living large, but he is stable. By any normal measure, this is someone who did everything he was supposed to do. Then his landlord decides to sell. He gets a Section 21 notice, 2 months to leave, no reason required, because until this year that was simply legal in England. He starts looking for somewhere else in the same area. There is nothing at his old rent. The cheaper places have waiting lists months long. His savings exist, but they are not enough to cover a deposit, the first month, and the letting agent's fees, all at once, while still keeping up his car payments and his gas and electric. So he does not tell anyone. He puts what he can into his sister's garage, gives away the rest, and starts sleeping in his van. 2 weeks later, he is back on the same shift pattern, in the same break room, with the same colleagues, and not one of them has any idea. That story is not unusual. That is the part that genuinely stops people when they first look closely at this. Nearly 40% of people newly assessed as homeless in England have never had a criminal record, an addiction, or mental health crisis behind their loss of housing. They are simply people whose income and Britain's housing costs stopped being compatible with each other. Researchers and housing charities have started using a phrase for this population that captures something the old stereotypes never could: hidden homelessness. People who are technically without a home, but who have got very, very good at looking exactly like everyone else. Think about what that actually takes to pull off. Every single day, the first question is not what's for breakfast. It is where is a safe place to park tonight without a knock on the window at 2 in the morning? Where is a toilet open before 6? A 24-hour supermarket, a hospital lobby, a garage forecourt. Many people in this situation pay for a gym membership they barely use for the equipment, purely for the showers, so they can walk into work looking like nothing is wrong. Clothes are rotated and kept folded on the back seat. Laundry is planned around shift patterns. The entire goal of every morning is to walk through that office door and give absolutely nobody a reason to look twice. And most of the time, it works. That is one of the more unsettling findings in all of this. Co-workers do not know. Sometimes even close family does not know. The concealment is not about pride. It has real, practical stakes for custody arrangements, for job security, for how a landlord views a future rental application. So the performance continues, day after day, without a single day off. Now, here's something worth sitting with before we go any further. Shelter, one of the country's largest housing charities, estimates that at least 382,000 people are currently homeless in England. That works out to roughly 1 in every 153 people in the country. The vast majority of them are not on the street. They are in what the system calls temporary accommodation, which sounds short-term and reassuring and is, for most families, neither. As of the most recent count, more than 134,000 households in England were living in temporary accommodation, a bed and breakfast, a converted hostel, or a single hotel room. And that number has hit a new record high for 12 consecutive quarters in a row. Inside those households are over 176,000 children. Shelter's own research found that families now spend an average of almost 3 years in this kind of accommodation before anything more permanent becomes available. 3 years of a single room, no kitchen, sharing a bed with a sibling, homework done on the corner of a mattress. It is not only warehouse supervisors and long-serving staff. Housing charities that work directly with women fleeing domestic abuse report a pattern that rarely makes headlines. One organization working with homeless women in London says that in over 20 years of casework, they have almost never come across a woman experiencing homelessness who has not also been affected by some form of gender-based abuse. Around 35 to 40% of women who pass through homelessness accommodation end up rough sleeping afterwards, often because what they are offered is not sustainable, not suitable, or simply not safe. A woman leaving an abusive relationship with 2 children does not always get placed near her children's school, near her job, or near the support network that got her out in the first place. She gets placed wherever a council has a room free that night, sometimes an hour or more away, and from there the same slow slide into a car, a friend's sofa, or a night bus can begin. Then there is street homelessness, which is smaller in number but the part everyone assumes is the whole picture. The most recent single-night snapshot recorded 4,793 people sleeping rough across England, a record high, and 171% higher than when this kind of count began back in 2010. And beneath even that figure sits a group that almost never makes the news. Research carried out by Heriot-Watt University for the Charity Crisis estimates that on top of the people counted as rough sleepers, somewhere around 12,000 more people are living in cars, vans, tents, sheds, and night buses, invisible to the official count because they are not, technically, out on the pavement. London carries a disproportionate share of all of this. Nearly 75,000 households are currently in temporary accommodation in the capital alone, more than half of the entire national total, and 370% higher than the region with the second highest number. London boroughs are now spending an estimated £5.5 million a day on homelessness, almost all of it on temporary accommodation, up from £4.2 million a day just a year earlier. Several boroughs have publicly said they are on the brink of financial collapse because of it. London Councils, the body representing the capital's local authorities, estimates there is now at least 1 homeless child sitting in every single classroom in London. 2 out of every 3 households in temporary accommodation in the capital are families with dependent children, and a large share of them are placed in overcrowded, poor-quality accommodation, often far from the school and support network the family had before. Councils across London are collectively facing a funding shortfall on temporary accommodation estimated at £740 million, and more than one borough has said publicly that it is on the edge of insolvency largely because of this single pressure. If what you've heard so far is putting words to something you had noticed but never quite pieced together, drop a comment with your town or city. It genuinely helps to see whether this tracks with what people are seeing where they live, because this is not confined to London or Manchester. Scotland's government has formally declared a housing emergency. Wales is rewriting its homelessness legislation because the existing system cannot keep pace. This is not a big city problem wearing a national disguise. It is a national problem that simply shows up loudest in big cities. So how does this actually happen? How does someone doing everything right end up without a stable place to sleep? The answer is almost never the single dramatic event people picture: a total job loss, a sudden catastrophe. Housing charities increasingly use a much plainer phrase for the real mechanism: 1 bill away. Not a figure of speech. A description of how thin the margin has become for millions of working households. Once you understand how that margin disappeared, The path from a rented flat to a car park stops looking like a personal failure and starts looking like a fairly predictable outcome of a system that has been quietly reshaped over 4 decades. There are 3 structural forces behind this, and none of them are new. They have simply been compounding, quietly, for a very long time. The first is the loss of council housing itself. In 1980, the government introduced right to buy, giving council tenants the legal right to purchase their home at a steep discount. It made complete sense to the people who bought their homes under it. It is one of the most popular housing policies in modern British history. But there was no obligation on councils to spend the proceeds on replacing what was sold. Since then, close to 2 million council homes in England have been sold off at an average discount of around 4% of market value. In London alone, roughly 316,000 council homes have been sold under the scheme since 1980, a number that is almost identical to the 330,000 households currently stuck on the capital's social housing waiting list. Nationally, more than 1.3 million households in England are now waiting for a social home, some of them for over a decade. Councils, on average, can only replace about 1 in every 3 homes that right to buy takes out of the system. The safety net that used to exist underneath low-income working families did not vanish overnight. It was sold off, one discounted purchase at a time, for 4 to 5 years, and it was never rebuilt at the same pace. In London specifically, the number of council homes has fallen from around 715,000 in 1980 to under 400,000 today, a drop of close to 4 to 5%, even as the capital's population and its housing need have only grown. Laid on top of that is a straightforward supply problem. Britain has been building around 200,000 new homes a year against a government target of 300,000, a shortfall that has run for years and compounds every single year it continues. Meanwhile, average private rents across the country have climbed to over £1,300 a month, and in the years since the pandemic, cumulative rent rises in many cities have significantly outpaced cumulative wage growth over the same stretch, even in periods when the year-on-year gap between the two has narrowed. A gap that widens for 5 years does not close itself just because the rate of widening slows down for a few months. The second force is the mismatch between benefits and actual rent. For years, Local Housing Allowance, the housing benefit rate that is supposed to help low-income renters cover private rent, was frozen while real rents kept climbing. A coalition of more than 40 housing and landlord organizations has openly called on government to restore the rate to a level that actually reflects a third of local market rents. Until that happens, a working family on a low income can be entitled to support that covers less than their landlord is charging every single month, with no way to make up the difference except cutting somewhere else. Food, heating, the car insurance that keeps them able to get to work in the first place. The third force, until very recently, was the sheer insecurity built into private renting. For decades, a landlord in England could end a tenancy with a Section 21 notice. No reason given, no fault required, just 2 months and out. Even in the final quarter before the practice was banned under the new Renters' Rights Act, almost 5,000 households in a single 3-month period were assessed as homeless specifically because they had been served one of these notices. That law has now changed. But the change came after roughly 2 decades of it being perfectly legal to end someone's home with no explanation at all, and the households who were pushed out during that window are still working through temporary accommodation today. Stack those 3 forces on top of each other: a shrinking supply of low-cost housing, benefit support that quietly fell behind market rent, and a private rental system with almost no security of tenure until this year. And you get exactly what the numbers show. Not a housing market that is difficult for everyone equally. A housing market that has become completely unworkable at the bottom, while remaining merely expensive and stressful for everyone above it. But the structural explanation only tells you how the crisis was built. The individual stories tell you what it actually costs someone's life. There are mothers with 2 or 3 children sharing a single hotel room miles from a school their kids have always gone to, doing the school run by 2 buses each way because the council placed them in the only available room, in a different borough entirely. There are people in their late 50s and early 60s, close enough to retirement to have started picturing it, whose landlord decided to sell the flat they had rented for over a decade. One woman in that position, 62 years old, a clean rental history, steady part-time income, was given 90 days to find something comparable after her building was sold. She could not find it. She moved into her car. She kept going to work. She told almost no one. There is no dramatic arc in her story, no single catastrophic mistake. Just a landlord who decided to sell, a housing market with nothing left at the bottom, and a gap that opened faster than she had any realistic way to close. There is also a group that gets almost no attention at all. People working full-time in the NHS and in social care, priced out of the towns and cities they serve. A nurse on a rotating shift pattern, a care worker doing early mornings and late evenings, cannot always choose to live somewhere cheaper an hour further out because the job itself does not allow for that kind of commute. When the private rented sector in a city becomes unaffordable on a public sector wage, the choice narrows to overcrowded house shares, a long and exhausting commute. For a small but real number of people, the car parked outside the hospital where they work. There is one more part of this that almost never comes up, and it might be the most significant hidden cost of all. When you are living in a vehicle, a huge portion of your daily mental energy goes toward pure logistics before the working day has even started. Where's it safe to park tonight? Where can I wash before my shift? How do I get from this car park to work looking like absolutely nothing is wrong? When that much of a person's attention is consumed by daily survival, there is genuinely less left over for anything else. For chasing a better job, for finishing a course that might change things, for simply being present with the people who depend on them. That is not a personal failing. It is a well-documented response to sustained pressure and scarcity, and it explains something people on the outside often find puzzling. Why someone in this situation does not seem to just fix it and move on faster. Because the conditions of the crisis are actively consuming the exact resources that escaping it would require. The trap is not only financial, it is cognitive too, and that distinction matters enormously for why short-term fixes on their own so rarely work. Think about what a single missed direct debit sets off once someone is already this close to the edge. A late payment triggers a fee. The fee makes the following month's rent harder to find in full. A landlord under no obligation to be patient starts the paperwork. A credit file takes the hit. And a damaged credit file does not just make the next application harder. In a market where letting agents can ask for 3 or 4 times the monthly rent as proof of income and a deposit running into thousands of pounds, it can close off entire categories of housing outright, at the exact moment somebody needs options to open up rather than narrow further. If this is helping you see something you hadn't quite put together before, a like genuinely helps more people find this video. It takes about a second, and it changes very little for you and quite a lot for whether this reaches someone who needed to see it. For a long time, the dominant story Britain told itself about homelessness was a story about individual failure, addiction, mental illness, reckless decisions, people who had drifted away from the ordinary structures of working life. That framing gave everyone else a comfortable distance from it. It made homelessness feel like something that happened to a fundamentally different kind of person, making fundamentally different choices. The hidden homeless workforce collapses that distance completely, because these are not people living outside the ordinary structures of adult life. They are inside them, working, paying tax, raising children, doing the school run, and still ending up, some nights, in a car park. When that keeps happening to people who did everything the system asked of them, the old explanation stops making sense, and people start looking for a better one. The one more and more people are arriving at is not that individuals are failing. It is that the system stopped reliably delivering what it once promised, and that did not happen by accident. It happened through 4 to 5 years of specific, traceable decisions about council housing, benefit rates, and tenancy law, compounding quietly on top of each other. Britain is not alone in this, and that matters too. The same pressures, a shrinking supply of affordable homes, wages that have not kept pace with rent, a private rental system that puts almost all of the risk on the tenant, are visible right now in the United States, in Canada, in Australia. People sleeping in vehicles has become a recognized, growing phenomenon on both sides of the Atlantic, in cities that were each certain, a decade ago, that this simply could not happen there. What is happening in a Tesco car park in Manchester tonight is not a uniquely British failure. It is the local version of a pattern playing out across almost every wealthy country that quietly let housing become an asset first and a place to live second. The details differ from one country to the next. The exact laws, the exact percentages, the exact name given to the notice that ends a tenancy. But the underlying shape is nearly identical everywhere it appears. Housing costs pull away from wages. The supply of anything genuinely affordable shrinks year after year. And the group of people one bad month away from losing their home keeps growing quietly in the background until the numbers finally force everyone to look at it directly. So what does all of this actually add up to? The homelessness crisis in Britain right now is real, it is growing, and it is rooted in decisions that go considerably deeper than most conversations about it acknowledge. The people sleeping in cars and vans tonight are not a collection of cautionary tales about personal choices. They are a measurement of exactly how far housing costs have pulled away from ordinary wages, of how thin the safety net underneath working families has become, and of how little space now exists between a stable working life and a crisis that most people still believe could never reach them. There's a government strategy on paper now, promising to end homelessness and rough sleeping and to deliver what ministers have called the biggest wave of council housing in a generation. Billions have been pledged for affordable housing. Right to buy has been tightened so newly built council homes cannot be sold off again for 35 years. Section 21 has finally gone. These are not nothing. But building takes years. Waiting lists are measured in decades. And every one of those changes has to outpace a crisis that is still adding new households to temporary accommodation faster than it is moving them out. The gap between the policy and the person sleeping in a car outside a hospital tonight has not closed yet. It may take a long time before it does. And the honest, uncomfortable question that stays with you after all the numbers and all the individual stories is this one. If people can do everything they were told would be enough, work hard, show up, pay their bills, follow every rule, and still end up without a stable place to sleep, what does that say about what has actually been built here? And what needs to change first to fix it? Council housing, local housing allowance, wages, something else entirely. Leave your answer below. I read every comment.